Thank you for joining us and welcome to Times Higher Education's exclusive roundtable with PwC on supporting university leadership to innovate in Australia and Singapore. So just some background, this is part of our regional roundtables on this topic. We've held discussions from Africa to the UK to the Middle East, and today we're going to focus on Australia and Singapore. We will also be producing a white paper in several months' time about some of the best practices that will come out of these roundtables. So the point of today's discussion is to exchange knowledge between all of these university leaders who've joined us on how to optimize engagement and support for university leaders and professors. And we're going to talk about how your institution's teaching and research delivery continue to evolve. And in one of the discussions before this, we talk about the short term, which is during COVID, but also in the long term beyond the next year or two, hopefully. So I would just like to introduce from PwC, is Chris Matthews, who's a higher education leader at PwC Australia, and Tristan Hockley, government and public sector leader for Southeast Asia. And thank you for all of our university leaders from Australia and Singapore for joining us. So the format, there is not really a format. I'm just going to throw out 4 or 5 questions, and this could be an open conversation between the panelists here. So the first question is very obviously about online delivery, which we're all engaged in. How are analytics, AI, and other digital technologies changing how you are delivering your education? Would anyone here like to start about how they're using technology to deliver classes or education? Just raise your hand, Liz.
Thank you, Joyce. And it's an interesting topic. I guess I wanted to leap in first because I would like to think about this in 2 ways. There's technologies that deliver education, and then there's technologies that assist teaching teams to design and expand their repertoire of teaching. And then thirdly, there's the question of digital fluency for our graduates anyway. So working in a digital learning environment offers new ways of accessing learning, and is also a native environment for the development of some graduate learning outcomes. Obviously, you're going to do data management and visualization online because that's actually where the real work is. But there's a second tranche of work which is apparent in the question, which is about what's the information that's going back to the teachers to inform their design to make it most pertinent, relevant, and effective. And in that sense, it's only going to grow, and that involves both upskilling our education teams, but also good provision of data and insight.
Yeah, that's very interesting, this sort of back and forth, that you're not just delivering education to students, but you're also going back in the other direction, that your teachers are getting feedback. And I forgot to ask you, obviously, if you could just briefly say what institution you're from. So Liz is from Deakin. And now we're going to move to Pascal, who's at Swinburne.
Yes, thank you, Joyce. Actually, you talked about the time frame and the sort of immediate COVID challenge, and then what happens next. I think in many ways, what we have done first is utilize that digital technology in order to teach what we were teaching before, but deliver it in a different way. And I think the most exciting challenge is to actually think about entirely new paradigms of education that will be enabled through the discovery and the exploration of those technologies. So some of the things that we're starting to explore, for instance, is whether or not our teacher students can actually be teaching a classroom of avatars before we throw them to the real world experience of being in a classroom. And this is not something that we would have necessarily thought about unless we had been confronted with the reality of COVID. So I do think that there is an interesting kind of adaptive stage, which we're going through now. But then I think there's going to be a much more creative phase that comes as we become more alert to the potential that those technologies are going to offer. And I do agree with Liz that the feedback loop and the capacity to have data that shows the effectiveness of what we're doing is actually going to be really critical.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Singapore, and Freddie, happy National Day, 3 days late.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about NUS?
Yeah, so I'm Freddie. I used to be the provost for 7 years in the other university in Singapore, NTU. Now I've moved on to be deputy president for innovation. But let me bring you back to a more philosophical, I'm catching myself, philosophical question. You know, for thousands of years, learning has been a very teaching-centric process. The teacher calls the shot. You just keep quiet and listen to a single guy with a bit of interaction, usually in one direction. But what technology has done is shifted the whole gravity towards the learner. And actually, I don't know whether it's obvious, but it has become learning-centric rather than teaching-centric. I'm not so sure that we want to think about this whole thing as how to assist the lecturer and teacher to teach better. You can teach as well as you want. It does not mean that people will learn as well as they can. All things being equal, the learner now with technology on his side can learn more and faster than what you can teach on the average. That was the philosophy behind my team when we started in NTU. A great ambition of making 50% of our courses interactive rather than lecture style. Of course, 7 years later, I left. But I learned one thing, and that is that you really want to rethink this whole thing, not from a teacher's point of view. The word pedagogy is wonderful, great, but it is slightly lopsided from the teacher's point of view. And often from the learner's side, learning science today is a great thing. So I'm just trying to broaden the discussion beyond COVID and beyond online and digital and so on. There's a lot more things happening 20 years ago, and I think that COVID basically accelerated what is inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yes, making it very learner-centric instead of just teacher-centric. Nick from QUT.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. So my name's Nick Smith. I'm the provost, still the provost at QUT in Brisbane. And I think it's an interesting, there's a couple of points I wanted to pick up on. One is that sense of what a university is in terms of a community of learners, and often a community which has a diversity of backgrounds, which we don't ever recapture in our professional lives. And the ability to exploit that, I think, is and leverage that with technology is much greater. And we're sort of slowly working our way into that. And in some senses, that provides a huge scope and a huge expansion of what we can do. But I think it also creates a degree of uncertainty in terms of people now have to actively navigate what choices they're making. And when we see that kind of diversification, which is not just the traditional undergraduate degree, but now we have micro-credentials, we have lifelong learning, we have people coming and leaving the institution. Actually, the choice of what they do and how they do it becomes a kind of important exercise in itself. So when we look at how we use data and how we use tools like AI and how do we make education predictive in terms of what it would do and responsive and able to help in that navigation process, I think that's going to be one of the key things that we have to grapple with, more than just delivering in new ways and delivering in more interactive ways. We've been looking at our attrition data this week, and actually that's where the data and the analysis has been helpful to say, how do we step in early for students who are at risk, but also how do we step in for every student and create the experience which is going to be most relevant and most important to them in terms of what their goals are within that wider, diverse, wonderful university community that we're part of.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think that's, reaching out particularly to at-risk students is so important, because I think a lot of students have been marginalized this year for various reasons. We're going to turn to Rebecca from Sydney.
Thanks, Joyce. I wanted to start by picking up Pascal's point about creativity, because I think when we get through what is the kind of fatigue of the moment, I think there's enormous opportunity for all of us to use that creativity as we think not just about turning our educational products onto online delivery, but more about our reach, who we can reach, our markets, what products turn to online, where we take a view that place-based learning is most important as a complement to that, how we think about the online experiences outside the classroom. So we're thinking about the personalised student experience in quite the same way as Freddie mentioned. We've got an enormous amount of data. And at my university, we, about 3 years ago, undertook a student journey mapping exercise. Now, that's got some way to go, but bringing integration of digital into that dynamic in such a way that we can start to think about using analytics better for the benefit of the student. I think that's an important space to really drive over the next period. Outside of education delivery, though, I just wanted to make the point that I think that, so in recent weeks, my team, I have the analytics team in my group. That team has been supporting us as Sydney went into lockdown. It supports us in the way we track people movement on our many campuses. We've had some instances of having to deal with support to contact tracing. So the ways in which our analytics functions are serving the institution is both in the delivery of our core work, but also in the way that we operate ourselves. And it's for that reason that last year I went out to recruit a Chief Data and Analytics Officer. So we have elevated the position in the institution because I do think it's such an important area for all parts of our work to professionalise and to continue to develop.
Thank you very much. I think analytics are really key as we head into this new era. I'm going to move on to Liz Johnson.
Just a quick addition, which was prompted by Rebecca's points, which were really well made, and that's about personalisation. So one of the dimensions of personalisation that we often forget is that learners vary in their capacity in their own learning skills. So a student who's new to higher education, who's never been in that situation before, is likely to need a much more scaffolded approach than somebody who's returning to study after a break, who already knows how they study best. So personalisation is also about not just the circumstances of the student, but also their learning maturity, if you like.
Thank you. Carolyn, would you like to respond to that?
Oh, yeah, to build on some of those ideas, enormously exciting creative potential now that we've got so many staff and students who feel comfortable with digital. We can really do some things we haven't been able to do before. And just one example from us is a program for our pharmacy students. It's a capstone, which has them running their own virtual pharmacy, both the business side and the prescription side. And that allows them to do that in a way that gives them very immediate feedback about either their business going broke or their patients, getting the wrong medication, which is fantastic. But we also serve, and this builds on Liz's point, very diverse student communities. So when we went into lockdown, we have a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. We have a lot of Pacifica students. We have a lot of African students, often from a refugee background. The assumption that everyone has a computer is not accurate. The assumption that everyone has access to the internet is not accurate. The assumption that everybody has a safe, quiet space at home where they can engage in all of these exciting creative elements is not accurate. So, for us, supporting our students was sometimes as basic as getting a dongle out to them so that they could actually access. We gave all of our computers in our library and our computers. We actually sort of packed them up and put them in car boots or things for students to take home. And so one of the things that we're going to have to be really thoughtful about in the with all the excitement, and I share the excitement about the creative possibilities of online learning, is just recognising that that has the potential to both help students at risk and using data analytics and other tools to identify those students and bring them forward. But it also has the potential, if we are not thoughtful about it, to with the digital divide, to really exacerbate existing inequalities. And our students were starting to say our teachers who are most creative and most interesting and most engaged, they all want them to download new software, and all that software costs money. And actually our students want less creativity. They want a couple of software packages that they can buy at the start and then they're done, or free online packages. So there's just a few elements we need to think about in this debate as also.
Yeah, thank you. I saw Professor Lau nodding, because like I am, he's from Hong Kong, and our home spaces are very, very small. It's very rare for a student to have his or her own quiet, large room where, actually we've been online for almost 2 years now. And sometimes students, you can see mom and dad or people in the background because there's just not space. Not everyone has a big Western house with a broadband connection. I don't know, Professor Lau, if you want to address that or not. I know that you're in Melbourne now.
Yes, I agree with you, because I'm originally from Hong Kong as well, and I still have a lot of friends in Hong Kong. And one of the problems is in Hong Kong, the living area is very small, and it's very difficult for these children to concentrate to study because they're just in front of the computer, because their mom and dad is walking around. And if the family have got 2 children, then even worse. And that is one of the reasons in Hong Kong, a lot of people will feel that using the digital technology for teaching, they made the pros and cons. Because pros is more easy to deliver the teaching materials, but the cons is the student cannot be concentrated. This is another problem. But to me, I really appreciate using the digital technologies for teaching. But the most important is how we develop the teaching materials, how we develop the structure of the teaching courses. For example, we are not just talking about using the PowerPoint to deliver the lecture to the student. We have to think about some way that is more attractive for the student to learn. Like the digital laboratory, there's a very important. In our university, we also have some lecturer. They are using software to make a digital laboratory. So the student, they cannot go to school, they can do the laboratory, to do the labs at home. That's a very important, not only for the COVID period, but also good for the part-time students. And I remember 2 years ago when I attended Times ranking summit I forgot about where, it's Korea somewhere. And then someone asked me about what will be the teaching model in the next 10 years. I do actually at that time I pick up one of the movie War-E, and we talk about everything. We go to virtual reality. So all of the family, they have a room. When the student go into the room, it's like a virtual reality. They can see all the classmates around, just like they are feeling the experience inside the classroom. So this might be the future, but the investments are huge. But the problem, the good point is that we are not just looking on the screen, okay, to learn, but we are physically to see someone moving. We can see the whole classroom inside your virtual room. And that might be something that will happen in the future. I'm not sure, because the investment is huge. But I remember the feedback from a lot of people is quite positive, because rather than we just look at here, okay, we just look at your face, but we have no interactions. So I do suggest for the digital teaching classroom, we have to really put our heart to design the lecture is more attractive and more useful to the student to learn.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that the idea of the online lab is really interesting, because right now there are a lot of students trapped in countries like Pakistan, India. They can't get, but it doesn't matter whether they're stuck out of China, Japan, Australia. I mean, this is hard right now. And a lot of them are PhD, postgrad, research intensive students. And, you're right that sending them a PowerPoint doesn't really help them. This moves on to our second question, which is how are these technologies diversifying or scaling up research? Not just lab research, but any research that requires communication across borders. By the way, if you don't want to use the little hand, you can also just wave if you want to jump in. Anyone wants to talk about digital research? Oh, Pascal.
Yes, thanks, Joyce. Well, actually, I do think that there are some really interesting inroads in enabling research at scale through the digital twins that increasingly are possible to create. So whereas, in the past, research has often required quite expensive infrastructure, equipments, and systems that could be actually generating data, as we move towards digital twins for a number of things, I think research can be much more collaborative with teams that are actually not necessarily located in the same country even, but it also means that we can scale up and generate quite a bit of data through the crafting of research projects that rely on digital twins. So I do think that the digital future provides great opportunity for our research activities as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Rebecca, did you want to add to that about research?
Thanks, Joyce. I just wanted to say that the digital technologies are enabling just increased collection and access to data. So it's the same point I made earlier about this explosion of information we have. And if you take that as a starting premise, it suggests that the kinds of research questions that you can ask and the scale of those questions is really incredibly expansive.
I was just wondering, Antonio or Houghton from Newcastle, do you have any inputs on how you guys are using digital technology for teaching or for research?
Yes, maybe first of all, I found this session very informative, so thank you for everyone for your really helpful insights. I've just moved from a main campus at Newcastle to here in Singapore, so really appreciate the difference in terms of what type of research can be done when you haven't really got some state-of-the-art lab facilities. So I take on board all the points that have been made about digital research, etc. But I suppose from my perspective, where I've seen the really significant research at my university that occurs is in really state-of-the-art labs where you might employ 70, 80 researchers working in a particular lab, working on some really upfront, amazing sort of developments in terms of research. So the ability, for example, to take on the hydrogen economy and what's occurring there in terms of research really does need labs that are sort of, let's call them wet labs, whatever you want, but you can't do that online. You've really got to be there producing miniature models of what would be plants that you can actually then scale up to produce hydrogen and then potentially export hydrogen, etc. So from my experience, the really innovative research that I've seen at my university has all been done in labs, which cannot actually be done online.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's some probably things I hear from engineering or biomed here in Hong Kong that there's just some things that you can't do, right? I see. Okay, Carolyn, everyone wants to talk about this topic.
That's an exciting topic. So completely agreed. I mean, and it is the same with teaching. One of the things that going online has taught us is what we really need to do face-to-face and do it well and compellingly in person, and what is actually better done online. And there are some types of research that simply can't, at least at the moment, be done anything but face-to-face. I think, and builds a little bit on what Rebecca was saying before, the types of questions that we can answer with huge data sets have really expanded in a way that even a few years ago we couldn't have been thinking about. And the potential here in the humanities and the social sciences and for research with impact is high. We often think about these cutting edge technologies in the STEM or the medical area, but there are all sorts of questions that we can ask now and ways we can inform public policy making, and both through the data and the capacity to visualise that data in ways that can be quite compelling and simple. We recently had a minister in who's responsible for early childhood development, and the Eunice Centre here has very big overlapping data sets from both public and private sources, could just show a map of the state, could show where the preschools were, could show where the highest ranked government preschools were, and then showed where the preschool kids were. Didn't match at all, but where the preschools were and where the children were. And then they overlaid that with socioeconomic data, which showed the preschools were where the money was, not where the children were. And in about a 2-minute presentation that drew on huge data sets, the minister suddenly went, oh, they understood the way a state was working in a way that would have taken, teams of researchers, your team of 60 or 70 researchers that Antonio was talking about in the hard sciences, years to sit down and collect and correlate those data sets. We could now pull together by asking the right questions in a matter of minutes. And so, I think the impact and the potential for social sciences and for those to work collaboratively with both government and the private sector to come up with solutions and ideas and insights that we couldn't have before is going to lead to some really interesting and exciting research in those areas.
Yeah, I agree. We're increasingly using data in arts and humanities and social sciences in order just to gather huge amounts of information the way we couldn't before. I know there's some projects now where the researchers are in their home countries where they're stuck are actually feeding in data, doing field research locally and then feeding the data into like a central research cloud, if you will. Liz.
Yeah, and building on that, so that kind of approach has been around for quite a long time. The World Wide Web was born out of CERN in Geneva, which is a worldwide collaboration, one of a group of collaborations that work on that massive, they call it an experiment. It's hard to think of something at that scale as a single experiment, but that's where it came from. It was a worldwide collaboration. And I think what we're talking about here is both access to high-level equipment and installations that we can't reproduce or don't want to reproduce everywhere. And of course, we do that with any particle accelerator anyway. Beamlines are available to people at distance, but it also invites specialisation of collaboration. So picking up on Carolyn's point, you can bring people in from all over the world through shared data sets and shared analyses. And we do that. That's a natural place for research to be. We publish internationally, we communicate internationally, we collaborate internationally. The thing about digital technologies now is that they increase the facilitation for that, and they give us new methodologies to visualize. I really love that point, Caroline, about showing the minister to visualize the data so that it reaches people who are non-experts as well as the experts.
Thank you very much. Nick, would you like to add to that discussion?
Yeah. So I'm also building on the points that Caroline and Rebecca and Liz have made so eloquently. It's interesting, as the tools are becoming more commoditized, it's no longer just the people who are sort of expertise in the tools who can apply them, but actually people who can often ask much more interesting and much more relevant questions, which speaks to Caroline's point around the sort of social impact and that connection to community. I suppose the other aspect is that, in that kind of data-centric world, there are really important questions around fidelity, around ownership, around how it is then used. And it's so easy for those to be disconnected as we do this kind of sharing if we don't have those kind of deep conversations. I worked for labs for many years and with experimentalists, and the joke we used to make that is if you were the person who produced the data, nobody believed it except for you. And if you were the person who used it, everybody believed it except for you. And so that those different perspectives on how we use information and how we deduce decisions are something we're going to have quite deep and quite fundamental conversations as a community, rather than just because I can put a number on it, it therefore must be true.
Yes, I think I think how we share data is also another entire conversation that we can have. Freddie.
Yeah, just quickly on undergraduate coursework-based experiments. Today with the technology and big data, you can actually do a very good job in the personalized experiments, virtual experiments. Not everything can be done virtually, but a lot of things can be. And the effect is quite dramatic. One example is when I was running the material science school in NTU, that's quite a few years ago, we actually came down to Australia to learn from a few of you guys doing virtual electron microscopy. That's really great because the electron microscopies are very expensive, few $100,000 a piece, and undergraduates invariably will damage it first time around. And actually what you're basically looking at is a screen, end of the day. So that's one good example. The other example I can think of was that when I started the medical school or Imperial College, NTU, School of Medicine, we decided upfront that it will not have lectures. And as important as that, it became very interactive, in many forms virtual. Virtual is not a poor substitute of physical meeting. It is empowering. So a lot of things can be augmented. So you use augmented reality and virtual reality. But the most important decision we made was to bring in a software. It's very well known now, is the IBM Watson. And these are medical students. And IBM Watson basically brings a rural doctor on par with Mayo Clinic because of the ability to access data immediately, as fast as what the Mayo Clinic doctor has. A single person's experience is incredible. But when you use AI in that way, it just blows the mind and equalize. So I foresaw that 20 years from now, at that time, doctors, will be routine to use AI, to use these sort of things to assess information. And we bought a several $million software just so that the doctors, those undergraduate medical students, and go on. Let me end by giving you a last example. So when we do research, it is not either or. Virtual researchers, researchers doing on big data, AI, it's not that they are doing something in replacement of. We hired 2 years ago a great guy from UCLA, Dean Ho. He's an AI guy. When he came, he worked with the Cancer Institute. Long story short, he came out with programs that basically can forecast and predict what is the most optimal cancer treatment for a patient. They tried it with one patient that had no more hope. And to their surprise, the cocktail of therapy that came out was unusual. No normal doctor, cancer specialist would recommend that. They went ahead. Within 6 months, she got great remission. They're now lining up 20 patients in NUH, National University Hospital, to do the same protocol. Long story short, digitalization does not replace, but it incredibly empowers experimental research. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very inspiring story of how digital research can actually literally save lives. I'm going to move on to another topic, which is about clusters of activity, whether it's clusters of teaching or research activity, what we call innovation precincts, and what differentiates different successful innovation precincts from others. And Chris, I don't know if you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about this topic.
Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Joyce. And again, it comes down to how you measure success, obviously, around these things. But globally, whether it's Mars in Toronto or 22 in Barcelona, and a lot of the work we've done around precincts as well, getting a few things right at the start, or getting them wrong at the start can have a huge impact. And when I say few things, often we found the alignment around shared value and being transparent around the individual value that's being derived from parties. This isn't a precinct or a innovation hub for a university. It's actually a part of society. So there's corporations, there's government involved. So what is that specificity of the purpose and individual value has been a critical one. A couple of other things that we found have been key levers of success. One is around the proximity, and you build strength of capability in the proximity. So it's very hard to build a tech innovation hub if there isn't a tech innovation ecosystem in the proximity. Like you can build the building, but they won't come. So you've got to work with the strengths of the locality as well. And I know we're talking digital enablement here, but the proximity does matter for a lot of these precincts. And then the last one, which is an obvious one, but it's been time and time again proved critical, is the governance, right? And this is there'll be challenges on a precinct. It's a 10, 20, 30, 50-year journey. Getting that right, that specificity of the purpose and the governance mechanism so it can evolve and resolve problems, so that state, federal, corporations, university, citizens, whoever the parties are, have an effective mechanism to help evolve that is pretty critical, as well as the obvious infrastructure, funding, government policy, and all the big things that often aren't there. That's kind of one
Thank
thing
you. Thank you very much for them. You talk about this journey that's going to take 20, 30, 50 years. You want to talk a little bit about what you think, like how you think successful research precincts will evolve moving into the future, into the far future.
The only thing I'd add to that, so when we talk about evolution, it's sustainability of them. So and it's stickiness for me. It's PwC's done a lot of work in Australia. We did some research focused around, in particular in my hometown of Melbourne, which is looking at how do we move from a monocentric city, say trains, infrastructure all into the city, to polycentric. And there's a plan of 7 precincts, polycentric city, but they have to be destinations now. So it's not just, for obvious reason, a synchrotron there and everybody will go. It's that destination. It's a 24/7 stickiness. So it's entertainment, it's strong infrastructure, as well as a core specific purpose, whether it be research, whether it be teaching. And we're seeing that's one of the key ingredients to making that enduring precinct. So that sustainability part.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that. That a hub is a really multifaceted thing. I see Pascal. Would you like to add about?
Just 2 things, and I agree with Chris that the fundamental role of a good coffee society is probably also a key success for successful precinct. But to me, there's 2 things that are really quite critical, and one of them can be crafted and engineered, and that's a complementarity. You don't want everybody to do the same thing, because otherwise your precinct is not going to actually deliver value. But the other thing, which I think is equally essential and much more difficult to construct by definition, is serendipity. You actually need to allow for people to bump into each other, bring a multidisciplinary perspective, and sort of think outside of the square. And I think that's the key to a successful precinct. It has to be built for the complementarity, but it has to allow the serendipity, which is absolutely critical for innovation.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think especially for students, just this idea that you're kind of in a cool place where a lot of things are happening. Rebecca, would you like to add to that?
I was just going to comment that, Chris, you didn't mention leadership. And often I find the conversations about precincts go very naturally to the governance question, because, of course, by nature, they are many different entities in place, in situ, trying to join together for a shared purpose. And you did mention that they have very long time horizons, and often in those time horizons of 20, 30, 50, you have a lot of leadership change, which means that the question of shared purpose and what measures success are change over that time too. And my sense is that you can't underestimate those moments for such a long time horizon goal, where the choice leader and the way in which you get to a point of agreeing success and outcomes and shared purpose, and the times at which you tend to have to relitigate when you have people change, is often a feature. I would also say that I think mindset is really important in this. If you have organisations coming to a precinct, they have to collaborate in order to get the outcomes that you're setting for yourselves. And collaboration isn't always a strong leadership feature. So how do we now, thinking about the future of precincts in Australia, I think we have real opportunity in terms of our student cohort now to think about the ways in which we build through our programs those skills, but collaboration is essential. And I think the role of the leader is to leaders.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to get into an argument about who has better coffee culture, Sydney or Melbourne, because I think it caused this whole thing to blow up. I think an essential part of these hubs or precincts, as you call, is, as Chris said, connection with industry. And I know that, like, for example, you know, the biggest example in Silicon Valley is that it happened because universities and, you know, venture capital kind of came together, right, in a place that was also a very exciting place to be. So, I mean, I think we can also ask, how important is it to commercialize research? And Tristan, I don't know if you want to maybe add something about technology transfer or commercialization.
Sorry, just wrestling with my mute here on my phone, so it's such a small icon. Thanks, Joyce. I mean, it's obviously stating the obvious here with all the financial pressures that everyone's on now, under now, that commercialization agenda, you know, is so important. But I think we just probably following a little bit of what Freddie's been saying. I mean, this journey to commercialize it has been going on for quite some time now, and I think I think the opportunities are absolutely the pressure to commercialize. But the bit that I probably worry about a little bit is how, you know, post coming out of COVID now, coming out of the funding pressure that a lot of us are under, does the commercialization agenda go too far and actually start to act as a bit more of a priority for what we should be really focusing on, the long-term research agenda? And so I do really worry about that. I think the following on from the discussions that we've heard and the role that technology can play in research, I think the research outcomes and the opportunities are there. I think it's all nicely tied in together with the precincts and the hubs and having, you know, everyone together. And I think my comment just before on the precinct side, I think in Singapore we're very, very lucky geographically that we have that small size and a close concentration of all those relevant players. I think we're very fortunate there. And I think with that, the opportunities in this part of the world to commercialize are really strong. But yeah, maybe my main point is just the worry that the focus perhaps goes too much. And maybe that's not something you should worry about, but yeah, that's something that I certainly come back to.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very legitimate concern. Chris, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I almost feel the debate in Australia has moved now to, I've seen it a few times recently on the research commercialization can fill this gap that's come from the drop in international student revenue, and it's my view is no, it's never going to fill that. It might be one small part of it, but in a funding environment where we're unable to cross-subsidize from teaching to this, I think the bigger question now is hard choices around where institutions focus on their research and where they stop. The research commercialization to fill the international student debate in Australia, I think, is flawed. That's my view.
Yeah, I've seen some stuff too, and I've seen some kind of, frankly, quite odd comments that, like, you know, if you have a budget shortfall, you should do like defense research or something because they'll bring in money. And it just seems like these are separate things, right? Like the income question just seems to be a big one. And I think, yeah, there are some hard questions about where to focus your research. Freddie, would you like to add from a Singapore perspective?
Yeah, first thing first, I can tell you for a fact that there's only so many universities that has made big money out of commercialization of their research. Most lose money. Basically, the aim is not to make money, but it's to make entrepreneurs who hopefully one day, and we are talking about 20 years down the road, gives a large endowment back to the institution. But let me raise another point. It's interesting that COVID was both a problem and an opportunity. In Singapore, I mean, to the extent that we are small and we are well organized, there was a really systematic scrambling of bringing sciences to the people to mitigate COVID. Commercialization is not necessarily a monetary thing. In these cases, for example, NUS, when we found out that's the stick that you stick up your nose a year ago, even if you have money and they cost $20 a piece, 10 times the normal price, they are not going to sell it to you until 6 months down the road. So we had a national emergency, and we scrambled a commando team to develop our own test kit. 4 months was what we took. But that 4 months had to go through proper process because this is a clinical trial. It's a medical device classified. So what I'm saying is basically that commercialization need not always mean more money. It can be, but commercialization empowers a university to show that research is profitable for society, and therefore give good reason why the government should continue to give research funding. That's the equation. And COVID was brilliant. I mean, from that point of view, many of our research team proved that the money that was invested in them was put to really good use. You might have heard of the breath analysis to test COVID. Two startups in NUS came out with that method, and both got regulatory approval for actual testing. And that was really a great advertisement for university research. Thank you.
Thanks. That is really inspiring. And I remember reading about that. It happened very quickly, that it went from NUS to testing. We were all testing like crazy here in Asia.
We had no life in the last few months. I was very involved. Absolutely no life, 24 hours a day.
Nick, would you like to add to that conversation?
Yeah, it's really, in some ways, reiterating the points that Freddie and Chris have just made. But I think there is a conflating of the idea that income can be generated to meet a gap with the signals and the infrastructure and the incentives that show relevance and productivity fulfilling mission for the institution. And in commercialization of research, I'm quite comfortable with the latter, for a portion of what we do, but not for everything. But the idea that we can take one income stream and replace it with another is a political expedience, which just doesn't make sense. If we want the universities to make money, there's many things they could do. This probably wouldn't be the first to fill short-term holes, but none of that would fulfill our mission, which I believe is doing large-scale, high intellectual risk bets, many of which will fail, on the premise that in aggregation, they really move society forward in a way that a standard commercial model by itself will not. And I don't think that's been something that has been really discussed widely in the political sphere.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. I mean, once these things hit mass media or the political arena, they get really overly simplified. And of course, universities are not just there to be like a tech company, because you have tech companies. You don't need, universities do something that's very, very different. Liz, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I'm just building on Freddie's point about the social good. So Deakin University, my university's headquarters are in Geelong. Geelong's a a regional town in Victoria, and its history has been very dependent on large-scale manufacturing in a very narrow group of industries. They stopped, as large-scale manufacturing often does, and Geelong's had to reinvent itself. Now, Deakin has been a real partner in that, and it's not just the commercialisation of individual industries, it's also the ethic and the outlook that goes with that, which shifts the way the town looked at advanced manufacturing, new kinds of business, service industries, all sorts of things. And Professor Tan might want to comment on Newcastle as well, which is a similar sort of story, I think.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Liz. I think Newcastle is probably a very similar situation with Geelong. So after BHP closed in 1990s, so we went through a kind of difficult process, and Newcastle University I think has been a very important part of this revitalization. So I totally agree with the other colleagues. When we're talking about commercialization of research, the social benefits of research should be part of the equation.
Thank you, Professor Houghton, about those social benefits, which I agree they're hard to measure, right? And you don't want to only fund research that has a dollar sign at the end, because there's a lot of social research. I also like a lot of you talking about how the university is situated within a community, as Professor Houghton said, within the Newcastle community, not just as a standalone campus that does research. Freddie, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about something maybe slightly sensitive too. First, I'm very grateful to the Australian government. When I was a young and promising guy, I went to Monash University. We never needed to pay school fees. I only paid $500 union fees. I had free education from Australia. I'm very thankful, grateful for that. It does make me very concerned about the university situation in Australia, especially the dire problem that you have with respect to less students and the demand for more budget and so on. Obviously, one of the big problem is that the market and the supplier is not meeting each other. And may I talk bluntly about this? China comes into the game. It is one of the, not just the largest market in the world, but the most receptive to innovation. I think people don't realize Vietnam, Indonesia, China. I have staff on the ground in these places. I can tell you, I've been there many times. You wouldn't believe how energetic people are in receiving new technology. The market is incredible, free more or less of a lot of bureaucratic things and so on. So NUS, we also face a student population downfall, mainly because as time passes, each cohort has less and less babies. You know what the problem Singapore has. So how do we meet our budget so that the number of faculty remains rather than proportionally get reduced? And one area we went into was master's graduate coursework. Now, for graduate coursework, we are now pivoting more and more to online. And once you go through, I know that some people just say, come on, education must be face-to-face. Well, we live in a strange world today. You can be more personal on WhatsApp than you can be face-to-face when you try to be polite. People are more frank, sometimes wrongly, online. But doing graduate courses online is something that is possible. And we have been going into it big time. And the revenue to be generated is not small. Master's course with not traditional, but I came out with a Master's of Science in venture creation. The word venture creation was coined by us, how to do a startup company. You will be amazed. The first application, we had about a few hundred applicants. We chose 60. The second went past 700-800. We could easily have gotten 300 students paying full fees for the masters. Now, of course, there is this other problem about engaging the Chinese directly. So, may I speak very politely? Sometimes it might be useful to go through an intermediary, so I can say, do a joint with another party that can access to the market that you cannot access so easily and directly. But just some sharing about this. But COVID will come and it will be managed. But what happens after that will be that the huge market in this part of the world remains more exciting than even before COVID. Thanks.
Thanks, Freddie. And I mean, I'm glad that you're so frank, because honestly, like here where I am, we are looking at a giant hub called Pearl River Delta, or a Greater Bay Area, that links Hong Kong, Macau, and Guangdong province. And yes, I mean, of course, there are politics here, but people are getting through the politics to create this big hub. And I think actually Southeast Asia is often really overlooked. There are 10 countries in Southeast Asia that are just, I mean, Vietnam is like an amazing place, and people think, oh, it's this like small Southeast Asian nation, but it's not. There's a lot happening.
Yeah, I missed one point that is very important. So in certain situation, Americans wouldn't now dare to go straight into the China market, maybe Australia to some extent, but you have brilliant energy, clean energy technology. It's amazing. But if the problem is you can't access the Chinese market directly, talk to a neutral country about it and work together. I will be always happy to help. I mean, end of the day, we are academics. We don't care about this kind of political boundaries, right? We're scientists. We want to make sure that everybody's research reach out to the whole world to get societal impact. So just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks, Freddie. Professor Hao-Tan?
Yeah, just following what Professor Fedi and Joyce, you have said, originally from China and now I live in Australia. So I totally agree with your observations. My responsibility in Newcastle University actually a bit very narrow compared with the colleagues here. So I look after international engagement of Newcastle Business School, which account for half of the international students population in the university. So my experience is narrow, but I speak from my kind of daily interaction with our students, international students. Many of them are Chinese students. And what I observe is that they are very technological savvy and sometimes even more competent than many of our staff lecturers. So I think there are two implications here, in my personal view. One is that we need to invest in our staff, in the technological competence, because this generation we teach actually they live and they grow, in that environment. So they're very skillful with the digital technology, which we just discussed. But this brings another point of mine, which is what's the value propositions we as an Australian university can put forward in the international market, especially the Asian market, like Professor Fedi and Joyce, you have just spoke. I think, to me, I think even though they sometimes in some areas, those Asian countries, they are going ahead in some areas in digital technology, AI. But to me, I think I'm still confident that we do have a strong base and a strong value propositions as a education institutes from a country like Australia, in a liberal, democratic country. I think, to me, I think a key value we can provide is the environment of critical thinking and development of international mindsets. Just going back to Professor Alan Lowe just mentioned, how we embedded those into a course materials. So it's not just a format of online teaching, but how we provide a framework to students. And I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hao-Tan. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because there's one thing about delivery of a course, for example, here in business, but those critical thinking skills and that global mindset really come from global campuses, right? University is probably the first time that most students ever meet people from other countries. It's very rare, actually, if you're in your own country. And so, this session is coming to a close. So I just want to end with sort of a concluding thought, on that line, that all of the things that we talk about, all of this digital technology and about all the hubs, ultimately it's about creating a global mindset. Because without that, you might as well just stay home. You can just go to your own university, right? So it is really, really interesting. And I think there is just so much potential in this area in Asia Pacific and Australia to grow this. Would anyone like to make a parting shot? Would anyone like a final comment before we close this session? Oh, suddenly everyone's quiet. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel like this conversation about how to support academics and university leaders to innovate, we could actually probably go on for hours. But thank you so much for all of your input. Thank you for PwC for co-hosting. And again, we will be producing a white paper on the subject. Thanks to all of your important input. And I hope to see you in person someday. I hope that I can travel either to Singapore or Australia soon and visit your countries. Thank you very much for joining us.